Hey everyone, welcome to This Prepared Life. I'm Allison, and today I'm going to talk about some of my favorite foods to freeze dry. Welcome to my homestead kitchen. I have some of my favorite foods to freeze dry out here, and if you have been around here for a while, you know how much I love my freeze dryer. And my freeze dryer was definitely a bucket list item. We have had ours for, we got it 2.5 years ago. So we have been using our freeze dryer successfully for 2.5 years, and I absolutely love it. If you really want to dive deep into me sharing about my freeze dryer, head on over to Instagram. I'm there at This Prepared Life, and I have an entire story highlight where I share all the things I freeze dry. So much information in that story highlight about freeze drying food. So let's jump in today and talk about some of my favorite things to freeze dry. One of my absolute favorite things that I did not expect I would enjoy about my freeze dryer is leftovers. I am not a super big leftover person. I will freeze things occasionally, but I absolutely love that when I have a serving or a couple servings left of some food item, I can pop that into my freezer, get it ready to go into my freeze dryer, and almost everything we have tried to reconstitute leftover wise has worked. We do a lot of stews and soups, and I will often freeze dry those leftovers. So while it doesn't look appetizing, freeze dried food is not the prettiest, except for the fruit. Freeze dried fruit is absolutely lovely. But this is a jar of freeze dried beef stew, and this is so good. So being able to use my freeze dryer for leftover soup, leftover stews, leftover meats that are not super oily has been such a great bonus for me. When we first thought about getting a freeze dryer, and the expense is what kind of made us hold off, because freeze dryers are not inexpensive. They're very expensive. But what made us kind of make that jump was actually just doing the math and figuring out, well, this is kind of our plan for our long-term storage. And how much is it going to cost us to purchase this food commercially versus the cost of a freeze dryer? We did that math, and it made a lot of sense for us to purchase a freeze dryer rather than continue to purchase freeze-dried food, because that is what we were doing before. We were just purchasing freeze-dried food in number 10 cans. And we tend to purchase or on our own store ingredients, not meals. Like I don't think I've ever purchased beef stew, freeze-dried beef stew from a company. I would rather purchase freeze-dried potatoes, freeze-dried carrots, freeze-dried beef, freeze-dried tomatoes so that I can make my own recipe out of those ingredients. It's also more versatile for us. But one of the things that we did not expect with our freeze dryer was how much it was going to replace other food preservation methods. So slowly over time, as I experimented with different things in the freeze dryer, my family kept saying, rather than dehydrating apples, can we just freeze dry apples? Or rather than dehydrating peaches, can we freeze dry peaches? So the freeze dryer has really replaced my dehydrator for a lot of things, for herbs, for fruits, for vegetables, because they just taste that much better. So another thing that I absolutely love to freeze dry is fruit. These are peaches and apples. Freeze-dried apples are delicious. Freeze-dried strawberries are delicious. We absolutely love freeze-drying fruit. Freeze-drying vegetables is also one of our top preservation methods for both our short-term layer kitchen pantry and our long-term layer. This is freeze-dried shredded potato. And the first time I made these are baked potatoes that I shredded and then froze and then freeze-dried. The first time I made hash browns out of these freeze-dried potatoes, my teenagers said that they actually preferred it to fresh, that they were that good. So freeze-dried potatoes are great. freeze-dried asparagus. This was actually an experiment, and I tend to freeze-dry little bits of things so that I know we like it. And if we don't like something freeze-dried, I'm not gonna have a whole bunch of it that we have to use. But so I did a bit of freeze-dried asparagus, and this is surprisingly good. It is a crunchy little snack. It can kind of replace a crouton on a salad. You don't need to rehydrate it, just put it on your salad. And it was so good. So we liked this so much, I ended up buying a case of asparagus and freeze drying a bunch of it. Another odd use of the freeze dryer, this is pumpkin pie. So like I said, we freeze leftovers, but sometimes I just want to experiment and I'm like, I had one piece of leftover pumpkin pie that no one was eating. So I cubed it and tossed this in the freeze dryer. And these are just a fun little pop of flavor dessert treat snack that I didn't expect to work out, but did. So again, that fits into that leftover category. Guacamole. I have another video on reconstituting freeze-dried guacamole. I don't know about your house, but in our house, we can't often go through the big containers of guacamole before they go bad and they start to get brown in your refrigerator. So being able to freeze dry leftover guacamole is great. Cheese is another item that I absolutely love to freeze dry, and oily foods are something you need to be mindful of in the freeze dryer, and some cheeses are more oily than others, but these work great if you were making something melted. I probably wouldn't freeze dry chunks of cheese and then try and reconstitute those. The texture just isn't quite the same. But I have reconstituted freeze-dried cheese and made quesadillas or used it in meals where I was baking it, and it is absolutely amazing. So these are some of the things that we freeze dry on a regular basis: leftovers, fruits, vegetables, dairy products, guacamole, things that go bad quickly in our refrigerator. And I was really surprised when we started our journey into freeze drying how much the freeze dryer replaced other food preservation methods. It really was just kind of an added bonus that I did not expect. So that is a peek into what some of the things I freeze dry look like, and hit that subscribe button if you want more homestead prepper content.